On the morning of April 20th, 1945, the day of his 56th birthday, the Symphony of Destruction had a terrifying rhythm. Red Army shells were slamming into the heart of Berlin every 8 seconds. Above ground, in the ruins of the Reich Chancellery Garden, a place once manicured now churned to mud and craters, Adolf Hitler emerged into the daylight for the last time. His skin was a sickly, waxy gray. His posture so stooped, he seemed to be physically collapsing under the weight of his failures. His hands, particularly the left, shook with an uncontrollable tremor from the Parkinson's disease that had taken root years before. He was there to press iron crosses into the palms of boy soldiers, some so young they hadn't started shaving, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. Just 1 kilometer to the east, victorious Soviet soldiers were already scrawling their names and hometowns onto the shattered, pockmarked walls of the Reichstag. Each concussive blast, a death rattle for his empire, made Hitler glance up. It wasn't with the sharp fear of a man in danger. That emotion had been cauterized long ago, but with the slow, sick, dawning realization that the grand clock he'd once bragged could never be turned back had finally, irrevocably run out of time. This is the story of what happened in the concrete tomb 50 feet beneath that garden during the final apocalyptic 10 days of the Third Reich. The bunker takes shape. Most people imagine the Führer bunker as a simple concrete box, a final hiding place hastily constructed for the end. The reality was a claustrophobic, 2-tiered subterranean complex, stacked like a grim, concrete bunk bed 50 feet underground. Up top sat the Vorbunker, an older structure with 16 small rooms serving as pantries, diesel generators, and cramped quarters for orderlies and staff. 30 concrete steps led further down into the Führer bunker proper, a fortress encased in up to 3 meters of steel-reinforced concrete containing about 30 tiny oppressive rooms. This was where Hitler would live, rage, marry, and ultimately die. A constant, maddening whine from the ventilation system filled the air, a mechanical ghost that never slept. It pushed damp, smoky Berlin air through filters that perpetually stank of diesel fumes in a palpable, metallic fear. By late April, the overburdened pumps coughed and wheezed, struggling against the rising water table. With every strained breath, the inhabitants inhaled the suffocating tang of mildew, cordite from the endless shelling, and the sweet, cloying smell of decay. To conserve the failing electrical supply, the staff lit the narrow tomb-like corridors with low-wattage bulbs, creating a disorienting world of deep, stretching shadows where the last flickering fantasies of a 1,000-year empire guttered and died. 20 April 1945, the birthday that wasn't happy. At 56, Adolf Hitler moved like a man of 76. His left hand trembled with a ceaseless tremor, a symptom of the Parkinson's disease that was ravaging his body. His back was bent into a permanent stoop, forcing him into a shuffle, and his skin had gone parchment thin and waxy. Yet, protocol demanded a birthday party. Down in the bunker's conference room, an SS aide rolled in a sheet cake topped with a Reich eagle crudely fashioned from icing, which was already drooping in the suffocating humidity. A handful of high-ranking Nazi officials, men like Goering, Goebbels, and Himmler, who had lately been begging for permission to retreat, now gathered to raise glasses of champagne. They offered hollow, muttered congratulations to the man who denied their every plea to flee the Götterdämmerung he had orchestrated. Outside, those 12-year-olds in their Hitler Youth uniforms received their military decorations instead of birthday sweets. When the pathetic ceremony was over, Hitler slipped back into his private study, dismissed his adjutants with a weary wave, and stared at the map spread across his desk. Soviet spearheads were now a mere 12 kilometers from the city center. 3 long minutes passed in silence, the only sound the distant crump of artillery. Then his voice was barely a whisper. "They will never take me." Never. It wasn't a statement of defiance. It sounded like the heavy final closing of a tomb lid. 21st to 22nd April. The break. On the 21st, the Soviet First Belarusian Front shattered Berlin's outer defensive ring, tightening the noose around the city's throat. General Heinrici, commanding the city's exhausted defense, rang the bunker to plead, once again, for permission to pull back the beleaguered Ninth Army from a hopeless position. Hitler, his face contorted with a terrifying, vein-popping fury, slammed the telephone receiver down with such force that the operator on the other end thought the line had been severed by an artillery shell. That evening, he summoned what was left of his general staff into the map room. As the vast maps were unrolled across the heavy oak table, his reading glasses slipped from his nose and clacked onto the surface. For a moment he stared, his eyes blinking. Suddenly, tears welled as he spoke the words aloud for the very first time, his voice cracking with the admission. The war was lost. A chilling silence descended, turning the humid bunker air to ice. Goebbels, ever the sycophant, tried to quote Frederick the Great's resilience in his darkest hour, but Hitler cut him off with a limp, dismissive wave of his trembling hand. A final funereal round of schnapps was poured. Then, as his generals dispersed into the gloom, Hitler began to pace the narrow, shadow-filled corridor, his footsteps a lonely, rhythmic ticking, a metronome measuring the very last beats of the Third Reich. 23rd April, the betrayal of Göring. A telegram from Obersalzberg landed in the bunker's communications room like a thrown knife. It was from Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, Hitler's long-designated successor. Citing a 1941 decree, Göring's carefully worded message asked for confirmation to assume leadership should the Führer be unable to act from besieged Berlin, adding that he would assume Hitler had lost his freedom of action if no reply was received by 10 p.m. For a man already consumed by paranoia, convinced that treachery breathed behind every shoulder, this was the ultimate betrayal. Hitler unleashed a torrent of incoherent rage, screaming for Göring's immediate arrest, stripping him of every rank and honor he had ever bestowed. Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and Göring's bitter rival, had delivered the telegram and now allowed himself a thin, triumphant smile. Göring's spectacular fall cleared a direct path to power for him. Amidst the political implosion, Eva Braun, who had spent the afternoon filming her Scottish Terriers with a 16mm camera in the Chancellery Garden, tried to lift the suffocating mood. She projected the silent, grainy reels on the ceiling of her room. The flickering shadows of dogs chasing tennis balls danced grotesquely across the cold concrete, a surreal and completely insane counterpoint to the relentless thunder of artillery creeping ever closer overhead. 24th to 27th April. The Goebbels family arrives. Magda Goebbels, wife of the propaganda minister, checked her lipstick in a cracked hand mirror that caught the bunker's dim, unforgiving light. She had come to the bunker to die, and with a chilling, fanatical devotion, she had brought all 6 of her children with her. They moved into the upper Vorbunker, their youthful energy a jarring presence in the concrete crypt. Little 6-year-old Haida, the youngest, toddled over to Uncle Hitler and held up a half-melted square of chocolate as a gift. Hitler accepted it, his hands shaking as he patted her blonde head, before turning away abruptly so the child wouldn't see his eyes fill with tears. That night, the sound of the children singing nursery rhymes echoed eerily through the concrete corridors, the innocent tunes drifting under the steel doors like a lullaby for ghosts about to be made. Down the hall, SS dentist Dr. Helmut Kuntz was given his horrific instructions by Magda. He was to line up ampules of prussic acid and morphine, preparing for the moment the children's parents decided they should not live in a world without National Socialism. 6 to 28th April, the execution of Fegelein and news of Mussolini. SS General Hermann Fegelein, Eva Braun's brother-in-law and Himmler's liaison in the bunker, was dragged back from a Berlin apartment, found drunk and in civilian clothes. He had been caught deserting his post, a suitcase stuffed with cash and forged papers ready for his escape to Sweden or Switzerland. This desertion, combined with Hitler's fury over Himmler's own secret negotiations with the Allies, sealed Fegelein's fate. A drumhead court-martial was convened on Hitler's order. Found guilty of treason, he was taken into the chaos of the Chancellery Garden and shot. The single crack of the pistol shot, barely audible over the din of battle, echoed like a door being slammed shut on the world of the living. Hours later, the bunker's radio spat out stunning confirmation. Benito Mussolini, the Italian Duce, had been captured and executed by partisans. His body hung upside down in a Milan piazza. Hitler, profoundly shaken, ordered the radio operator to play the report twice, then asked for a printed copy of the transcript. He spent the rest of the evening alone, sketching small, obsessive circles on a notepad, his face a grim, unreadable mask, contemplating the fate of his own body. 7 to 29th of April. The wedding. midnight, in the bunker's map room, a bizarre and pathetic civil ceremony took place. Walter Wagner, a minor city official and Volkssturm soldier who had been hauled from a nearby defensive position, nervously officiated, his party uniform a strange sight in the underground headquarters. Eva Braun wore a dark silk dress she had chosen for the occasion. Hitler stuck with his usual black trousers and a gray military jacket, its collar ringed with sweat. The vows, including a declaration that both were of pure Aryan descent, took less than 10 minutes. Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann signed the marriage certificate as official witnesses. When Eva went to sign her new name, she instinctively wrote the letter B for Braun, then scratched it out and carefully wrote Hitler. The newlyweds hosted a champagne breakfast afterward, a few bottles of Moet and Chandon served by candlelight as the main generator sputtered and failed. Hitler, his hands trembling violently, lifted his glass. "Now I have achieved everything I wanted in life." The words hung in the dead air, heavy and suffocating as smoke. 8 to 29th April. The last will. Immediately after the morbid wedding breakfast, Hitler retreated with his secretary, Traudl Junge, and began to dictate his political testament. It was a final, hate-filled tirade that showed no remorse, blaming international jury for a war he had started and every catastrophe since 1914. His private testament followed, a surprisingly mundane document, leaving his modest personal belongings to his relatives and his art collection to the German people. A bitter irony since most of it was already looted or reduced to ash. The documents were copied, rolled into tubes, and sealed, then given to 3 trusted couriers with orders to slip through the encircling Soviet lines. Only one made it out. The other 2 were captured within hours, their mission a failure before it had truly begun. In the margin of the political testament, Hitler had scrawled Bormann 3 times and underlined it. Historians still argue whether it was a final, emphatic endorsement of his most loyal subordinate or a paranoid, desperate curse. 9 to 30 April. The quiet before. Dawn brought no sunrise to the bunker, only a dull, ominous red glow filtering through the emergency exit hatch as Berlin burned above. Hitler slept until 10, then emerged in fresh underwear to meet his valet, Heinz Linge. He thanked the man for his years of loyal service, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, then handed over his favorite framed portrait of Frederick the Great. "Hide it," he instructed, "where the Bolsheviks will never find it." Linge carefully folded the picture inside a copy of the Völkischer Beobachter newspaper and slipped away. At noon, Hitler sat down for his last meal, a plate of ravioli and mashed potatoes. He shared a few mouthfuls with his Alsatian, Blondie, and one of Eva's Cocker Spaniels. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, he began a final, somber tour, shaking hands with the remaining staff members one by one. There were no grand speeches, no final tears, just a soft, almost inaudible Auf Wiedersehen that sounded like goodbye to the entire world. 10 to 30 April. The suicides. At approximately 3:15 p.m., in the small study off the main conference room, Eva Hitler sat on the blue and white sofa and bit down on a cyanide capsule. She sagged sideways, her eyes open, a faint, serene smile on her lips, the smell of bitter almonds filling the air. Hitler stood beside her for a moment, then put his personal 7.65 millimeter Walter P. PK pistol to his right temple and squeezed the trigger. The recoil threw his body back, his head slumping over with blood pouring from the wound, and came to rest just inches from Eva's feet. Moments later, his adjutant, SS Sturmbannführer Otto Günsche, and Heinz Linge cautiously entered the room. The acrid smell of gunpowder was thick in the air. They wrapped the bodies in gray, blood-soaked blankets, hauled them up 4 flights of concrete stairs to the Chancellery Garden, and laid them in a shallow shell crater. Petrol was sloshed over the remains, a match was struck, and the Third Reich's last funeral pyre rose as a column of greasy black smoke against the rubble of Berlin. The Soviet guns never paused their barrage. History's machinery does not stop for funerals. Aftermath. The bunker's last hours. With the Führer dead, the spell that had held the bunker's inhabitants in its thrall instantly snapped. A frantic, selfish panic erupted as staff clawed for civilian clothes and forged exit papers. Some chose to swallow the cyanide capsules Hitler had distributed, rather than face Soviet captivity. Others simply pulled on rags and vanished into the fire and chaos of the city above. Joseph Goebbels remained just long enough to oversee the poisoning of his 6 children, who were first sedated with morphine. He and his wife then walked into the garden to be shot by an SS guard. Martin Bormann, clutching the last copy of Hitler's testament, dashed into the night, only to die in the shell fire just meters from Lerdo-Bahnhof station, his body not definitively identified for decades. Soviet troops finally reached the bunker complex on May 2nd. They found a surreal scene of abandoned chaos: empty champagne bottles, half-eaten sandwiches, uniforms discarded in heaps, and a single child's shoe lying in a corridor. In Hitler's study, the blood-soaked sofa had already begun to stink in the damp, stagnant air. 12 years earlier, the Reich had promised a glorious 1,000-year empire. It had managed just 12 years, ending in a 12-day reign in a tomb underground.